Start with Mr. Toogood. You, in your testimony, you discuss a dramatic departure from the status quo, and of course, a lot of what we talk about is funding. Are you suggesting that we kind of turn over or start over on the Highway Trust Fund and the Airways Trust Fund and the Inland Waterways Trust Fund in order to create funding mechanisms? What do you mean? What's the departure from the status quo?
I think that the basic structure of those programs is okay. I don't think it's really the need for the federal government to make a higher percentage of project selection decisions necessarily. What I do think the federal government has to do is set very clear and very aggressive targets and then distribute those greenhouse gas reduction targets to states and metropolitan regions based on the share of VMT or air travel or marine travel that they may be responsible for. And so allowing the sort of strength of federalism to do what it does best, which is have people make decisions that fit their local needs, but be very clear in what the responsibilities are moving forward.
Yeah, I think I understand your comments about it being a break from the status quo and getting states and localities to go along with that. It may be difficult, but I appreciate bringing it up. Mr. Proctor, I'm not going to ask you to go back 200 years in the history of your company to talk about how infrastructure has changed or technology has changed or your workforce has changed. But perhaps just in the last 10 to 15 years, how it's changed, because you talk about training a 21st century workforce. What is your workforce, how does it need to be different today than it was even 10 years ago in looking at the future of this, of waterworks?
Well, on the manufacturing side, it's dramatically different. The techniques we use to manufacture our products include robotics. Most of the melting systems are computer controlled. Even the finishing systems are 21st century type equipment. And so a skilled workforce is essential to the successful of our manufacturing operations. But in terms of how people use our products, if you look at water infrastructure, for example, the $1 trillion number that you hear people knock around about how much we need to invest in water, that's really just to restore our infrastructure back to the condition it was in when it was originally built. But we have opportunities today to make our water infrastructure smarter. Wireless remote sensoring, monitoring, leak detection, all those sorts of mechanisms. And to do that, it requires that the utilities that are going to operate these systems have the sort of skills and technological expertise that it takes to run them.
Yeah, thanks. I'd love to expand on that, but I do want to move on, and I imagine that we will expand on it. Mr. Somweber, on resiliency standards for port infrastructure, is there a broad swath of, is there a broad difference from port to port in this country on how they deal with infrastructure and resilience?
Yeah, I think a lot of the needs are really determined by the local situation and what the existing networks are for a given port. So it's highly variable from port to port.
And that's but you know, in your testimony, I guess you imply that is a problem.
Well, I think the point is that we need to have a national assessment of risk based on the specifics around each port's location, its physical nature, and its value to the broader regional infrastructure.
Yeah, okay, all right. Scarlett, the issue of natural infrastructure is important in my district and in my state. We're doing a lot of restoration, habitat restoration. One of the challenges that we have with habitat restoration, you just look at Lequay Island, Leque for the clerk. Lequay Island, the number of different sources for funding in order to do that restoration has made it a longer project than many want, but it's also going to function in terms of resiliency for not just the habitat but for the surrounding area. Has your organization given thought to funding mechanisms or breaking down stovepipes among funding mechanisms?
Yes, we've given a lot of thought to funding mechanisms, both public and public-private. I want to mention one. We've actually been working with the insurance industry to model the effectiveness of natural infrastructure in risk reduction. And not in the U.S. yet, but there's potential here. In Mexico, we've actually worked on creation of a bed tax across a tourist district and deploying the bed tax to support reef restoration and reef protection, as well as invest in an insurance fund to insure the reef. It's very innovative. It has potential in the U.S. But we're looking at other things, such as teaming up, for example, with water districts, and where nature solutions can actually better handle wastewater, for example, or water supplies, and use ratepayer fees to invest. So there are a variety of sources, depending on the circumstance.
Thank you. Yield to Mr. Graves.